All right. Welcome everyone to our Career Spotlight Healthcare. And we are here with our special guest, Dr. Amy Yetasook. Um, welcome. So the way that our event is going to, I guess, progress through hopefully an hour and a half. If we need to, if we have good questions at the end, might take a little bit longer. Um, We'll start by introducing Dr. Amy's, I guess, current position, what she does, a little bit about that, and then move on to how she got where she is today, um, and a little bit more about her, I guess, alma mater, USC, um, some of the places that she's been after that, and then moving on to healthcare and learning more about her profession. Okay, and then we'll at towards the end we'll have a Q&A. Feel free to type in questions in the chat when you come up with them, and I will definitely scroll through. And at the end with the Q&A, the way that it'll work is I'll pick and choose the questions and just fire them at Amy, and we'll see how it goes. Okay, so let's begin. All right. Here we go. Here's Dr. Amy. And she is a current assistant professor at David Geffen School of Medicine at UCLA. And previously, I guess, I wanted to ask Dr. Amy what the difference was between you had originally on your LinkedIn general and bariatric surgery, but now it's changed to minimally invasive bariatric surgery. Are
Yeah.
you not doing general surgery anymore?
No, I do a lot of general surgery. I would say, however, I do most to almost all of that general surgery in a minimally invasive manner, and we could talk about what that is. And that's a
Sure.
bit more of just a formal name change that reflects sort of how they renamed the division. It's sort of a technicality, but it would be
Oh, okay.
either way, general and bariatric, minimally invasive bariatric, both are applicable.
Okay. And and if you joined us earlier, we were talking about Dr. Amy's work week and how it's maybe it started out kind of like what you might see on television, maybe Grey's Anatomy type of and now it's kind of coming down to a more controllable schedule, more manageable. And Dr. Amy does split her time between surgery, I think you mentioned, clinic hours, as well as teaching or education for medical students at UCLA. But we'll move on to how she got to her current positions and whether or not she is a Trojan or a Bruin. Right.
What question?
Yeah, so yeah, we have a few teachers on staff. Well, we have some from UCLA, some from USC, and so there's always this little feud.
Yeah.
Um, but I put in here a few logos that might pertain to your past or present, I guess.
Yeah.
And I'll have you go through it and kind of introduce, I guess, each logo or each part of your journey.
Sure. This is a great, first of all, nice to meet everybody. Feel free to share your faces. Love to, meet you all. Wish we could all be in person, but this seems like it's a great format. As far as how I started, I'm not sure I was 100% certain that I wanted to be a physician, as I'll talk about it in just a minute. I was actually a music major going into college. So, if there are any of you that are not 100% sure about your career path, that's okay because sometimes things can evolve as time goes on and you're allowed to change your mind. You really have to follow your heart and your path. And I think as time goes on, you're less concerned about maybe what your family thinks or your friends think. It's really important that you pursue something that makes you happy, that you want to get up and do every morning. So I started out at Saugus High School, public high school in Santa Clarita Valley. Nothing there too special. However, I was a very good student, and I think that is something that will be a good point to make, as you go on. Good grades are always a plus. And depending on the type of application, which we'll talk about later, that you have, good grades are definitely a core part of how to get there at the very beginning. I went to USC for my undergraduate, and as I hinted before, my undergraduate major was actually cello performance, and I graduated with a degree in music. So very different. I was thinking I was going to be a hardcore classical cellist for the rest of my life. I did get to USC under a full ride academic scholarship. What I did was I was pretty young, 14, 15, and I applied for the resident honors program, which they take about 35, 40 kids from across the nation. And what they do is you are able to double your high school senior year credits as your first year college credits. So I was able to walk my high school graduation as a college sophomore. Which was a little weird because, going to high school graduation, I was already like, oh, I'm, thinking I really wasn't. I'm too cool for this because I've already been 3-year college. So essentially, I had three real goals when I was like 14, 15. I wanted to get into the music school at USC to play the cello, which I was, admitted to. I wanted to go to the resident honors program early so I could go to college early, which I was fortunate to be accepted to that program. And then, my parents really didn't have a lot of funds for college, so it really was on me to secure scholarship money. And I was able to go there with a full ride. I'm not sure any of these things would have happened now. Things have gotten really competitive when it comes to college admissions. So I admire all of you who are in the path now, but I was very lucky at that time to have the fortunate ability to study in that manner. Um,
Wow. Oh,
uh,
one second, Amy. So you mentioned the full ride scholarship and the program. Did you hear about this program from your school counselor, or did you apply separately?
I applied separately. I had very supportive school counselors, but I'm not sure my high school was a high school where a lot of the students ended up going to 4-year universities or were academically that serious. This was something that I sought out by myself. I read about it. Of course, I brought it to my counselor and my registrar, who were, and our vice dean, who was very supportive, but they were like, yeah, there's no precedented path. We will support you in the ways that you tell us how we can support you and we'll get you there.
Mhm.
So I don't think there's anything wrong with carving your own path. But yeah, I found it on my own.
Okay. And just maybe a little inside information. What during your time at Saugus, what was your GPA like, and what was like your, I guess, your high school schedule like?
Yeah, I think GPA is calculated different everywhere. So
Yeah. Uh-huh.
I, it's not like perfect. And that was now very, very long ago. I'm going to really age myself if I say how long ago, but my GPA was something like 4.7 at some point.
Mhm.
That's what I graduated. I did not graduate as valedictorian, mostly because they had a different way of calculating that with the AP classes. And because I left for my last year of high school to go on to USC, I did not come back to stand as valedictorian, but I was near the top of my class, certainly.
Well, great. All right. So you got to USC and a year earlier than the rest of, I guess, the students from Saugus at your
Yeah.
graduating year.
Yeah.
And what was your, I guess, first, second impression of USC? What was, dorm life? How were the college courses different from what you had in high school?
Yeah. So dorm life was different. I had never really lived away from home. It was a bit crazy. I was young, obviously on campus, very impressionable. It was a really cool, big, wide world though, because I was starting to meet students from other states who were all doing different things in pursuit of different careers. And I realized being a bit unique and being a bit weird, maybe even being a bit nerdy was just like totally fine. And I sort of found my tribe of friends. And, we all continue to support each other to this day. I have a lot of friends that I have known now, literally from the first day of our dormitory when we arrived on campus all those years ago. So, yeah, hopefully you will also all have friends for life as you go along your journey.
Great, thank you. And let's continue on to, I guess, you finished USC with a degree in music, cello performance. And what happened after that?
Yeah, I started to have some real misgivings about, whether I wanted to. do that full time. A musician's life can be really difficult. A lot of practice, so alone, a lot of teaching, a lot of traveling. And not that I wasn't like down with that, but the pursuit of art, which by definition can't be perfected, is is an artist's life, and someone can criticize your interpretation of art, and it can be very personal in a way and very painful. And probably the transformative experience was that I was giving flu shots one day on campus as a volunteer at USC. And I think that was like, the thunderbolt moment. We don't get often many of those in life, but I remember being like, okay, so I get to be with people and, heal people, touch people, even if it's just a flu shot, right? It helps their health. And I get immense satisfaction out of it. And I didn't have to stay alone in a practice room for 8 to 12 hours a day, which honestly was about what I was doing even as a high schooler. So to me, this was enormously satisfying. And I set out at that point to switch from music into medicine. Obviously, I was already very academically inclined, but it wasn't something that I thought I was going to do for my career up until I decided to switch.
Oh, okay. So my guess is the coursework in music did not really match up with what might be expected of a med school student. How did you go about maneuvering that and maybe preparing for the MCATs?
Yeah, so a bit unconventional. I am self-supported. My parents did not have a lot of financial means. Um, this was not something they were going to be able to help me with. This I was going to be on my own. So I very much took to the internet, just as we do now. Obviously, that we have different ways of doing it. Found myself a support group online. I don't even think this exists anymore, but I think they call it Student Doctor Net. And I figured out, okay, what classes do I need to take? What makes me a competitive candidate for medical school? How can I sort of overcome now these days, actually, it's considered a positive thing if you come from a different undergrad degree or have a different background. Now that's what we look for. And I can speak to that later about admissions because I sit on many admissions committees. But at the time, it was almost feeling like it was a deficit. How do I get over this? How do I get myself ready for medical school? So I didn't have much money, as I mentioned, so I decided to find a research position at UCLA during the day. So I was working a full-time job during the day, but honest to God, guys, I think I was getting paid like $20,000 a year. It was purely for the experience and for the letter of recommendation and for the potential publications that could come out. And I can talk about publications later and the importance of applying for medical school and residency. And then I had to go to school full time at night. So it was a tough period of going to school or working full time during the day, going to school full time at night, and then saving up money by doing weird side gigs like trivia hosting. Or even I was participating in scholarship programs to get the money to apply for medical school. So that took me 3.5, 4 years to kind of carve together all of my prerequisites and apply for medical school. And if we want to take an aside to talk about other ways to get there, there are formal post-baccalaureate programs and formal medical master's programs that you can use to jump to finish the pre-med stuff before you get to med school. If you're not a traditional sort of pre-med undergraduate degree like biology, biomedical engineering, biochemistry, that kind of stuff. There are ways to get to medical school from sort of a less traditional undergrad degree.
Wow, awesome. Thank you. So you mentioned having to work I guess, work during the day and go to classes at night. Um, and eventually ended up, how did you choose the med school program? Or, who maybe they chose you. But how many, I guess, programs did you apply for? And then what helped you decide, the exact one you wanted to pursue?
Sure. Just as an aside, when I see my battery goes down to 5%, I'll switch over to my phone. But let me get back to the question you asked me. So something that you will find in common, these are California students we're all talking to. California students tend to have a bit of a disadvantage in the sense that there are many of us and not enough of schools. This is excluding, of course, DO schools, which is a separate subject, and Caribbean schools and foreign medical schools, which have their own sets of challenges when you try to come back to the United States after graduating from those. So essentially, if you're a California person applying to medical school, unless you graduated at the top of your class from your university, you're pretty much looking to just apply very broadly, like everywhere. This school in particular, called Rosalind Franklin University of Medicine Science, the school is called Chicago Medical School, actually. Chicago Medical School was jokingly referred to as UC Chicago because we were about 80% Californians, I think, my year that I matriculated into medical school. So it's not uncommon at all in order to sort of follow your dreams and to pursue your career, to leave the state, to leave your home, leave your county, which, you know, we'll talk about it later on in the program, but was a really significant thing for me from a girl from Santa Clarita Valley to leave home. That was a big deal, but many of us have to do so. Not everybody, but many of us do.
Oh, yeah. Well, thank you. And so how long were you at the Chicago Medical School?
Yeah, Chicago Medical School is a 4-year program. I did decide midway, I was thinking I was going to do something more primary care internal medicine, then sort of had a freak out moment thinking, gosh, I think I actually want to go into surgery. Am I equipped for this? So I did a research fellowship year at North Shore University, which is affiliated with University of Chicago. So I took 5 years, basically 2 years of sort of like the book coursework, a year of rotations. Then I did a research year and then went back to my final year of rotations. Some medical schools will have different formats. The traditional format has usually been 2 years of didactics, which is book learning, and then 2 years of clinical rotations, which means you're in the hospital, really learning how to be a doctor.
Okay. Um, I think this might be a good time for us. Did you want to switch over to the phone?
Yeah. I'm going to mute myself and video. Okay.
Okay, are you back?
Back.
Okay, great. All right. So, continuing on, I guess, from med school, and you mentioned a little bit of, oh, you wanted to be a surgeon. Um, can you tell us more about, that moment where you decided, I guess, which field you wanted to pursue, I guess, or which career you wanted to pursue in medicine, and what, how you weighed that decision, the pros and cons, the different selections or different options you had available to you, and then what got you into surgery.
Yeah. So, I do not come from a family of physicians. There's no precedent, no mentors really that I had to sort of guide me one way or the other. So I went into medical school being like, okay, I'll just see what happens, see what I like, see what I fall in love with, hoping every rotation would just sort of come down with a message from the sky, like, this is it. You are chosen. You're one of us. And as much as I absolutely realized that I was meant to be a physician once I started those rotations, it was very confusing because I loved all my rotations. In fact, I actually did surgery as my first rotation, which is traditionally not what you want to do if you want to be a surgeon. But I figured, okay, I'm not going to do surgery for sure. So I'm going to do that first, get that out of the way. Mostly because when you're a brand new medical student in a hospital, you literally do not know how to do anything. You feel pretty awful and pretty useless. Just because you're book smart doesn't mean you know how to round on a patient, find where their numbers and vitals are, report out the labs, present a patient on rounds, figure out what it means to enter orders or take care of the patient. It's really overwhelming. So surgery was my first, and I was thinking, okay, let's get it out of the way. Ended up absolutely loving it. I mean, I lived, breathed, ate surgery. I think I was there like 120 hours a week as a student. I just did not want to leave the operating room. And then I thought, well, it's your first one. Every single rotation is going to be this freaking awesome. And all of them were pretty great, but none of them really kind of gave me that oomph that surgery did. However, my medical school grades weren't as stellar, so I was thinking, I'm not sure if I'd be, adequate for this. And actually, around midway, around December time, I did emergency medicine. And I did emergency medicine at Cook County, which is like the famous um, hospital that they used in the original series ER, the George Clooney series. And I thought, this is the bee's knees. Emergency medicine is for me. They let me do so many things at a county hospital. I got to treat a lot of patients solo, although well appropriately supervised. And I thought, well, this is it. In fact, they had an anonymous box for medical students that attendings, the big bosses, could write little notes about and drop about the students in a box. And someone wrote a note about me saying, easily the best MS3, which is a third year medical student of the year, please have her come back for an away rotation. So I'm like, okay, this is it. This is that electric bolt from the universe coming down and being like, Amy, you're going to be an emergency medicine physician. So I'm like, yes, this is it. Let me prepare for this. This will be my career. And I distinctly remember she still practices there. There was a woman physician on that shift when I was kind of, sort of talking about my plans. And she is a toxicologist as well. And she came over to me at the beginning of the shift and she goes, you know what? No. And I was flabbergasted, bewildered. I was like, I'm not good, no, or like, what do you mean? And she goes, well, emergency medicine is like being a jack of all trades. You know a little bit about everything, but you know nothing about anything. She's like, hearing about your past, being a musician and knowing your instrument really well and competing at the highest level and being on, radio and international stages and playing with the LA Phil, I have a feeling you would actually shine as a surgeon. And I was just dumbstruck. You can't understand how devastated in a way I was. Here I am working my way up in my imposter syndrome, self-esteem, like, yes, I'm going to be an emergency medicine physician. And then here comes someone out of the blue, a stranger that goes, no, surgery. So I literally remember going home, flopping on my bed and laying at the ceiling going, I don't know what I'm going to do with my life. And going, okay. And I remember part of the conversation she also told me, she said, you are thinking about the safe option. So you already put the no in your head that you can't be a surgeon, but you can be a surgeon. And so just think about it. And I remember kind of trying to brush her off and working my shift. And at the very end of the shift, I was like scooching out the door and she grabbed me by my arm and said, hey, don't forget what I told you. I gotta say, those kind of moments, and I try to remember that as a teacher now, those kind of moments really stay with you. So there I am, flopped in my bed going, I don't know what I'm going to do. And having the guts to call a friend and say, hey, what are you thinking? This just happened to me. And this friend happened to just have finished a year of research, that research fellowship they ended up doing for a year, and saying, you know what, there isn't a replacement for me. Maybe you could come and do a year of research with this surgeon and figure out if you have what it takes. In addition, and you can build up your resume by helping do research, write publications, present research at meetings, and basically bulk up your CV so that by the time you're able to apply for residency, you can get in somewhere. So that was kind of off I went. I finished out the rest of that year, and I took a break in between that third and fourth year to do that research with North Shore University of Health Sciences, which is affiliated with University of Chicago. And that was a really eye-opening experience.
Oh my goodness, that's quite a journey. Um, so the publications helped a lot, and all those experiences, and finding that, that one person who said that you could be a surgeon, that made all the difference. Now,
Yeah,
I know applying to residency programs is quite of a big deal in I guess, the med school arena. Can you tell
yeah.
us a little bit more about that process and what it's like. I know I've had a few friends go through applying for, I guess, like what a matchmaking program type, and
Yeah.
yeah, and having to, I guess, maybe defer or wait or
Yeah.
um, yeah. So can you give us a little bit more insight on that?
Sure. It in many ways, in a physician sort of build up to your career, it's one of the best and like worst like periods of your life is preparing for the match. So essentially, the match is a day, and I'll explain it in a little bit more detail, where you find out where you're going to train as a resident. So just because you graduate from medical school doesn't mean you're allowed to practice medicine. So you have to graduate from medical school, and then you have to complete a residency in a field, and then take your field's board exams in order to become something. So, for instance, if you want to be a surgeon, you have to do a general surgery residency, take the general surgery boards before you can be a surgeon. That is all after medical school, right? So for me, making the switch to sort of surgery field, I had to make sure I was competitive enough to apply for surgery residency, which there, aren't that many programs in the country, aren't that many spots at each residency. And essentially, you put all of your programs in a list in an algorithm and go on interviews. And these places also rank you. And there is a magical, mystical, I'm joking, but in a way, it's blinded to you to help protect both the student and the place. But essentially, there is an algorithm, a computer system that will match the residents to the program. And the way they culminate that at all the end, and we can go backwards to talk about how that process works, but the way it all ends, excitingly enough, is one day you sort of get a computer notification that you have matched. So for instance, that like, okay, I know I'm going to match, but you don't know where. So you're like, okay, I'm going to be a surgeon some days. Should I not get kicked out of my general surgery program? But I don't know where. So usually it's a big celebratory day on match. They actually hand you an envelope, and you open up an envelope and you read the name. Some places will have you read the name on stage, which can be a mixed bag, right? What if you didn't like where you matched, or where you matched in a place you didn't expect, and now all your friends and family, all your classmates are watching you be disappointed, or it's really awesome. For me, I was very nervous to match one because, as I mentioned before, I wasn't sure that I was the best candidate. I did obviously make myself as competitive as possible during school with leadership, with volunteering, and with research, right, from that research year. But I also, at that time, was married, and I needed to match in Illinois because I, at the time, owned a restaurant in Chicago. So I had a lot of stuff going on for me where I needed to also accommodate a partner and a location, which is not uncommon. As our life goes on, we may need to accommodate life changes, but it just makes things a little bit more complicated. So Carl was a brand new program in the central Illinois. It's about 2 hours away from Chicago. They were a trauma one. They also uh, they they were about I was the first categorical student matching, meaning that other residents had actually done other years elsewhere before they had started in the program. So I was the first sort of like brand new coming straight from medical school resident matching in there. There was only 2 residents a year. So it was a new program, but as I will talk about later, if asked, it ended up being some of the best years of my life because I literally got the best training over there. And, I'm coming back to California as a big girl attending, and it is really clear that the skills I learned there makes me great in some ways superior to some of those that were trained elsewhere. So I have to say, in the end of the day, the match always works out how it's supposed to. That's what they say, and it's true.
Wow. So they have to go through a lot of, I guess, your CV and different criteria.
Yeah.
And in terms of, well, this matching process, in terms of what makes a CV great or more competitive, is it just the more research and the more experience you have, or what does it take?
Yeah, so I'm a lot more confident in this area answering this question now that I've sat on several rounds of admissions, being in an admission committee for this. We look at everything, okay? We look at where are you from? What's your background? What did you do for your undergrad? What were your grades like? What were your grades like in medical school? Did you honor all your rotations? Meaning, did you perform well when you were in the hospital parts of your rotations? What are your letter of recommendations like? How do they speak about you working in a hospital environment? What does your personal statement read like? Some of these personal statements are incredibly gripping. What kind of research did you do? What kind of career are you looking to have? Will you be a good fit for the program? So it is essentially all the stuff that you guys are doing now, from high school to now, and all the preparing you do, all of that goes towards this freaking day of matching into your residency. Not to be all dramatic, but in a way it is. It is a culmination of all the hard work you've been doing this entire time, plus all the hard work you will do, and it gets put all together. And then we try to figure out, who are you as a person? Are you likely to succeed in that field? Are you likely to succeed at the program you're applying to?
Oh my goodness. Okay. Um, and let's move. So you mentioned Carl.
Mhm.
How did you end up going, I guess, coming back to California? I know you were out in Chicago.
Yeah, so Chicago, Rosalind Franklin was in North Chicago, though I commuted from Chicago proper. Um, P.S. North Chicago does not mean it's north of Chicago. It literally means it's in Wisconsin. So there you go. There was an LA girl mistake right there. Um, yes, Carl was in Central Illinois. And then I always knew that I wanted to somehow try to find my way back home, but I was never going to compromise my training. So after surgery residency or after any residency, you can specialize by doing what's called a fellowship. So now we're in the part where we're doing residency, and then after residency is fellowship, should you choose to. Not everybody does, but I chose to do a fellowship in minimally invasive, advanced GI and bariatric surgery. That was the field I fell in love with when I was in general surgery residency, and I wanted to specialize that. Um, UCSF Fresno was a world-renowned program, and it was a bit of a complete long shot, but it was my number one. Cleveland Clinic was number two. I think Emory. I actually got a lot of interviews at a lot of the Ivy League schools. I was very happy with my quality and caliber of fellowship interviews. I think I was so scared by the experience I had for residency that I thought I was not going to match in fellowship, but so I applied way too broadly, way too many programs. And then I think when I started hitting like 50 or 60 interview invites, I'm like, okay, I'm going to be an MIS surgeon. I need to slow my roll and really pick the programs that I think I want to go to. So there is a true master of laparoscopic bariatric surgery who is at UCSF Fresno. And when I went to the interview, I was like, this is it. I have to be here. This is the place that's going to teach me how to be like one of the technically most gifted surgeons around me. And I have to be here. So I ranked them number one, and I told them, and I didn't tell anybody else that. And I was lucky to match there.
Oh my goodness. All right. So you made it back to UCSF, Fresno, back to California. Okay.
Yeah, so that bought me a California license because obviously, in order to do fellowship in Fresno, you have to get a California license. So then that makes searching for jobs easier. And
Mhm.
as far as that attending, that's the big girl, big boy job, right? The real reason for you doing the whole thing in the first place. Um, I applied, I looked everywhere. I interviewed in the Hamptons at Stony Brook. I took interviews all up and down the state, considered traveling to Iowa. I considered going back to Carl. I was heavily recruited at Carl since I was a second year resident, and they were applying every tactic possible to try to get me back there. I obviously had a home, and then I had a new restaurant there too. So I had lots of reasons, and some of my best friends, a lot of ties to come back home to Central Illinois. But the job that I currently have became available, and that is a little bit about timing. That's not something you can necessarily control. So it does sound a little crazy, like why the heck would I go through all of this just to have it be out of my control? But the job market is something you don't necessarily have control over, and this job position became available. But sometimes it doesn't become available for 10 to 15 years, et cetera.
Mm. Do you know what the statistics are more or less like for, let's say, med school graduates going into residency? Are there, I guess, more students than there are positions, or
Yeah.
vice
So
versa?
You bring up a really good aspect of something that I have not studied as well, but I can tell you about the trend. So
Okay.
it used to be when I was in medical school, even if you were the worst medical student in your class, you would still match into a residency. So that might be, I don't know, family medicine or psychiatry, or not that those are bad fields or poor fields at all. I have some of the most esteemed colleagues and some of the most intelligent people in those fields, but you would get a spot somewhere. Now that is not the case. So now you're competing with a much higher number. It's now musical chairs. There are now less chairs than there are people. So now you are competing for a spot, and there is a chance now, if you graduate medical school, that you are unmatched, which is really unfortunate because then you have to employ other routes and different paths in order to try to get to where you need to go to get a residency and then ultimately to sit for your boards and have a career.
Wow. So that could possibly, well, maybe pause or end even your journey into medicine if you
Yeah,
don't get matched.
yeah, I would say that if you are intent on becoming a physician, a board certified physician, even if you do not match, it is not the end of the world. I have a lot of students that I mentor as well. I'm a clerkship director for PA students. I mentor medical students. I sit both on the student committee as well as the general surgery residency committee. And it is not the end of the world if you do not match. It is, of course, emotionally devastating, right? You have to kind of go back to the drawing board and figure out how to retool your CV and what to do with your time while waiting to apply for the next year. Or you can also, it used to be called scramble, but now they call it soap. So there's a process in which you can go into the unfilled spots in random parts. So it is less desirable in the sense that you don't necessarily get to choose where you go, but you may be able to pick up a sort of a spot that hasn't been filled somewhere else. So say, for instance, you wanted to match into, oh gosh, okay, we'll just stick with surgery because I would speak most confidently to that. You don't match with general surgery. There are preliminary spots around the country that are not guaranteed to make you a surgeon, but they are on the path towards that. They're sort of like an alternate or substitute sort of, and it's a little tough because instead of having to be on your best behavior during your rotations for 2 months, say at a hospital, in order to get a letter and for them to like you now have to be on performance for the better part of an entire year in order to get that letter to see if that either that institution will take you or that your experience will be so good that they will refer you out to another institution. And yes, some people will go through this for a number of years before they have to give up on the dream of becoming a surgeon entirely. And then they may have to match or scramble into other residency spots. This area of residency gets a little bit more murky. It's obviously not traditional and not as clear cut, but I have plenty of friends and colleagues who have had to employ this pathway, and they are just as good of a surgeon or just as good as a physician. So, it's not the end of the world if you don't match. It's devastating, but it is definitely something that you can overcome.
Wow. Okay. Thank you for that insight. Let's move on to your out of state experience. I know you were mentioning having to head all the way out there to Illinois, um, possibly not really in Chicago. Can you tell us about what that experience was like, having to, coming from Santa Clarita Valley, USC, and then, finding out that you're going to end up at Chicago Medical School.
Yeah.
What was that like?
So I don't know of those of you that are here participating or those of you who will watch this later, if you've ever lived in any other state or been outside of California that substantively, but wow, it was a complete change for me. Um, there in some cities is a lot less diversity. So if you're not aware of that or well equipped for that, you might find that really surprising. The weather certainly is just absolutely huge. It was like the first time I'd ever lived through a winter that was like true traditional four seasons. I to long story short, was miserable for many years before I kind of got used to it. And then after 10, 11 years, finally being able to make it back home was like, oh my God, I can ditch all the winter clothes. Um, but it was actually, in a lot of ways, one of the best things I ever did in my life. So some of my closest friends and people I consider like chosen family are all still in Illinois. I have grown so close to so many of them. There are really good-hearted people in some of these smaller towns. Um, and yeah, different pace, different life, just as all the counties here in Southern California are different, right? Riverside, San Diego, LA, all these areas. We may have like, cliches and sayings. Wow, going to Chicago and then going to, more rural Midwest from there, moving all the different neighborhoods in Chicago. It was a really different experience. And so I would recommend, I would try to keep an open mind. I mentor a lot of California kids who are all like, please tell me how to stay in California. And while if you have the grades and if you have the scores, you can, great. But sometimes the best fit for you isn't actually in state. And you go and you have that experience and it ends up being something that's really, truly transformative and changes your life. So you might not believe me now, but you're going to have to trust me in that one.
Wow. Okay. Um, and for those of you who do not know where this picture is, I think that what is this called? Navy Pier or
Yeah,
in
same
Chicago?
here. This is Chicago.
Yeah. Yeah. Sears Tower and everything. Okay. Um, and moving on to what more or less of what you're doing now
Mhm.
in your career at Harbor UCLA, you know, what I know after like residency, fellowship, and all those programs, you already have some form of idea of what you'll be doing. But what were your, I guess, expectations for your job, for your future career, and how did that compare with what the reality of it at the moment is?
Sure. So, um, to answer that question, I probably have to go back to how my life and lifestyle was as a medical student and as a resident. So, I don't want to scare you, but I also don't want to paint a picture that's unrealistic. When you're a medical student or when you're a resident, no matter which field you pick, you will be working very hard. You will spend lots of nights. You will spend weekends at the hospital. Often, your obligation as a medical student is like the limit is you can work 80 hours a week. So, if you've ever worked a job or gone to school, that's a lot. So, you kind of go from zero to a million as a third year medical student. And it's different these days depending on which school you go to and how they transform the curriculum. But essentially, you go from learning from a book and taking a test to being in a hospital, and that expectation on certain months of the year is going to be at least 80 hours a week. So that's a lot. And you're not allowed to just take off because you feel like it. You're not allowed to go attend a friend's wedding just because you feel like it. You're not allowed to go out to a party just because you feel like it. You're not allowed to just take off the holiday if you feel like it. You start to realize that there are obligations to patients, there are obligations to your colleagues to give them breaks, and you have an obligation to the hospital and the services that you're on. So you live a different life. And so for some people, if they've not ever experienced that or aren't accustomed to that, that's a really big deal. I definitely missed out on a lot of maybe certain milestones of friends' life. I, just couldn't pop over to somebody's quinceanera, could not pop over to someone's like 1-year-old party, could not pop over to hang out with someone's new dog. These kind of things are just not something that could happen. You either had an exam or a test or, places you needed to be in the hospital. So you kind of get this sort of battle hardened survivorship mentality during residency. You're like, I just got to make it. I just got to finish. And when I finish, life is going to be amazing. So during residency was the era that they actually cracked down. Residents used to work far past the 80 hours a week. We often worked 120, 130-hour weeks. And then the laws started to really crack down and the governing bodies really started to crack down, trying to make sure that we had, more days off so that we didn't crash our cars and things like that or fall asleep at stoplights. So things became safer as I became a senior resident. Even then, we were working very hard. And as I mentioned, I was in a very small program. So I couldn't get lost in a sea of 14 interns. It was really like, if I didn't do it, you had to do it. If you didn't do it, I had to do it. And all the doctor, all the staff knew your name. So you really had to be sort of on tip top shape. I would say that that really gives you this mentality like, oh my God, I can't wait to just be that big boss because that's when I'm going to set my own schedule and do whatever I like and sleep as late as I want. Okay, maybe not. I would say that my life is significantly better now than it was when I was a trainee. So, yes, there is light at the end of the tunnel, and it is great and it is amazing. I get to help patients doing exactly what I want to do all day. And that satisfaction is something that cannot be replicated in any other way. That being said, I still work 5 days a week in some hospitals, depending on your job. You may be 1 week on, 1 week off. That sounds pretty good. That's not my schedule. And depending on who's in your department or who's in your division, you may have to share a call, which means you may need to live in the hospital overnight or at least be available to take calls all throughout the night. So someone could call you for an emergency, say for a surgeon at 2 or 3 in the morning. It really depends on what field you go into. Like psychiatry really doesn't have any emergencies at 2 in the morning. Emergency room physicians, yes, there are emergencies, but you work your shift and the moment 7 o'clock hits, you're done. No more emergencies. They cannot contact you really for anything after that. So it really depends on the field that you pick. So I can mostly speak to surgery, but life is great compared to how my training life and my med school life was. I have plenty of time for hobbies. I picked up surfing some years ago, and I absolutely love it. I live at the beach now, and I surf. I have, still my music hobbies as well, and I have now more of a social life. I can now plan for Friday night things, Saturday night things. That wasn't always the case, and I don't want to scare you. You just need to know what you're getting into. It is exceedingly rewarding at the end if you don't get burnt out by the whole process. And the system is now in place to give you much more of a life. I will give you another example before we end this question. A lot of my residents actually have pets, like dogs, that are alive, meaning they are able to go home at the end of the day and walk them, which means they don't have that bad work hours. I would not say that was the case when I was starting up in training, but now residents have cats and dogs and babies. So now it is totally a thing to get pregnant during residency. I think it was not explicitly said, but definitely frowned upon for a female trainee to be doing that. But now it's now it's protected. It's a protected thing. They're supposed to give you all the time that you need to go and take all of your wellness exams and visits, and you're given some time as well after you deliver before you need to get back to work. Obviously, if you need more time or there's special things that need to accommodate, they have to see, do you qualify to graduate? So for some of those, physicians in training, they need to push off graduation until they are able to do all they're able to do. But essentially, what I'm trying to say is that trainees now have way better work-life balance than I ever did in training, and it's only going to get better. What does that mean down the road? We may need to have more and more fellowships and more training, and maybe the training path takes a little bit longer to be just as facile in some ways than just living in the hospital all the time and just, eating it. But I do think that it's a very, very reasonable career path now.
Okay. And just a side question, through residency, fellowship, and are these paid positions that you're able to get while you're doing residency? Like how do you
Yeah.
essentially pay off med school and all of that?
Okay. That's a good question. So there
Hmm.
will be those rare few that will have their medical school paid for.
Hmm.
Lucky them, because that wasn't me. There have been some philanthropic actions that if you get into a certain med school, your tuition is paid for. You have no idea. If you can manage that, that is like a gift from the universe. Take it. If not, yes, once you are hired into residency, your residency position is a paid position. Okay. So it depends on which area of the country you live and what type of position you get, but you could get paid anywhere from 35,000 a year to 75, 80,000 a year. Okay. Now, of course, you got to pay taxes on that just like everybody else. And I think, sadly, if you even it out about how many hours you put in, you probably make like, a couple bucks an hour, $5 an hour, truly. But, it's not for forever. It's not for the long run. I remember sometimes being frustrated. You have like nurses ragging on you that you work with, all in joking, and then you realize like that nurse across from you is making like twice as much as you. And like they're thinking like you're some rich person. You're like, no, man, I'm just trying to get by. It's enough to live. It's enough to pay for housing, pay for food. Yes, maybe even a small family. But you live pretty lean. And then the expectation is that hopefully your first hiring job will be enough to start paying back your student loans.
Wow, thank you. Some great insight into the reality of paying off med school. Um, Moving on, let's dive a little bit deeper into what exactly you do. I hope these images kind of play to what you're doing. I just found what might be applied to your, I guess, your field. Um, I'll let you take it away.
Yeah. Some of these procedures are not done anymore and definitely not commonly as done. But yes, these are great pictures to kind of show an example of some of the surgeries that I do. So bariatric surgery is weight loss surgery. It's weight loss surgery predominantly for diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, and sleep apnea. So this is not liposuction, right? This is not a cosmetic surgery. This is not plastic surgery. This is surgery to help you get healthier. Um, for those of you that like reality TV, if you've ever seen like My 600-Pound Life or 1,000-Pound Sisters, that's more of the type of surgery that I specialize in and I'm really passionate about. With this type of surgery, I'm actually able to reverse and cure diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, sleep apnea, and a lot of other diseases, because I believe obesity is a disease, and it's a disease of inflammation and chronicity. And basically, that extra weight causes everything to go out of whack so that you end up getting all of these diseases.
Oh
And
my
as far as the
goodness.
robotic part is concerned,
Yes.
what I did training in at UCSF Fresno, which is minimally invasive surgery, meaning that sort of what you see on Grey's Anatomy, where they're like in a big pool of blood with a giant incision and suction and like several people at the operating table. I I rarely have to do that type of surgery. And if I do, I'm in trouble, or it's a really bad case, and I know that I'm going to start out in that manner. In general, all my surgery is done with small incisions from 5 millimeters to 12 millimeters. I put ports in and I put instruments in, kind of like you see there. That's not exactly it, but essentially, I either use plain laparoscopic instruments. So, kind of think of it, imagine like you carve out a pumpkin, you put holes in the pumpkin, and you can only use the tip of the chopsticks to work on inside the pumpkin, as a sort of like a timely holiday analogy. So that's my specialty, is that I can do complicated types of surgery without having to make the big cut. And because we know that that big cut can cause a lot of pain, increased length of stay at a hospital, cost of the hospital, and more complications like pneumonia, blood clots, and yes, even death.
Wow. And I know there's all different types of surgeons, and what led you to bariatric surgery as opposed to any other field?
Yeah, that's a good question. So,
Hmm.
as I said before, and sort of told you my tale about how I came to fall in love with surgery, I thought maybe I would do primary care. So, I actually did a fellowship for during med school for underserved patients called the Schweitzer Fellowship, and I ran my own like free clinic in an underserved area of Chicago. And I discovered a couple of things. One, I absolutely hated clinic, which meant I needed to find a field where I wasn't in clinic all day long, like outpatient primary care. And the second thing was is that I really loved the disease of diabetes. So when I fell in love with surgery, I kind of put away this dream that I would ever have anything to do with diabetes, because diabetes is often tackled by your internal medicine, your family care doctor, or primary care doctors. And then somehow my second or third year, PGY2, PGY3, that's what they call it during residency, I was fortunate enough to be part of and be mentored by surgeons who did this type of surgery. And then, JAMA and the AMA came out with articles saying, hey, there's a way to reverse and potentially cure diabetes. And I was like, that's it. I'm going to do something that's going to help diabetes, and I get to do surgery, and it's super complicated, high level surgery. And I absolutely love it. And I would love to learn how to do it through small incisions. Remember, I get to do this in someone that's like 3, 4, 5, 600 pounds. And so when you're doing that through small, tiny little incisions, it gets to be very technical. And this is something that I'm super passionate about.
Oh my goodness. All right. Well, you must be pretty good at chopsticks as well. Through a
All
pumpkin.
right.
Yeah. Moving on to the next slide. So music in the OR. I found an old picture, but what struck me was the harp in the OR, obviously. Um, is this a thing for surgeons? Do you choose music to play while you're in
Oh, yeah.
surgery? You know, what happens?
So I want to say that one of the best things about being a surgeon is that I get to work in my pajamas, aka my scrubs. I do not have to wear fancy suits or fancy work clothes. I get to work in my comfortable scrubs all day long. And second, I can play whatever I want in my operating room. Gosh, have I worked so hard to have like the ultimate sort of vote. That being said, I actually wrote a paper about this, an academic paper, and I think the best way to go, in my opinion, is sort of like a democratic opinion. So if I'm working with a bunch of nurses, scrubs, technicians, anesthesia, and everyone's in the mood for top 40, that's what we're listening to. Some of my residents want to play DJ, and so they play stuff that I like a little more EDM house stuff. Great. I think the only thing you probably shouldn't do is play one like super heavy metal where literally you can't hear anything. And two, you need to turn the music on only when it's appropriate. So if anesthesia is, intubating the patient, AKA they're putting the breathing tube down, because remember, when you have surgery, you're completely on life support. So when anesthesia does this, they need concentration, they need to have, quiet, they need to make sure all things are going. So I usually don't start blasting the music until everything's sort of gotten set. And then I turn off the music when anesthesia is ready to extubate the patient or take that breathing tube out. So I think I've made it sort of like a team thing, a democratic team thing. And then I do it when it's appropriate. But yes, some of the coolest thing about my job is I can play whatever I like. Sometimes I sing in the robot just to annoy my residents, so they'll go faster and be better. And just to, annoy whoever is in there if I decide that I want to annoy them. But it's great to be able to play whatever you like in the operating room. How many jobs can say that? Not too many.
Um, and for your particular type of surgery, and you mentioned there's an anesthesiologist. How many other players are there in the room with you in the OR, like the different types of doctors or medical
Yeah.
professionals?
So I think sometimes what people don't realize is that it takes an entire army to get a patient into the operating room and out safely. You really are involving anywhere from the check-in, from when the patient checks in to have surgery and leaves. 10 to 30 people are involved, and probably directly in my operating room. 6 to 8 people are involved in my actual operating room at the time I'm doing a surgery. So it's very team-based. I think people who play a lot of maybe sports or play instruments in like chamber music or orchestra or participate in a lot of team building exercises, you really learn a lot of valuable skills because I'm always communicating, I'm always talking, I'm always anticipating the needs of my team, anticipating the needs of the surgery and moving one step ahead. And it's almost like a big symphony, right? So as a musician, I can tell you it's almost like directing a symphony and you're the conductor. You have to make sure everything sort of moves in a smooth manner. And then when it does, it's very, very rewarding and very satisfying.
Great. I know we have some students who are interested in going to medicine, healthcare, but they going into for bachelor's degrees right now, so maybe pre-health or pre-med. And I think you mentioned earlier in our program that you were in there for music for your bachelor's, and sometimes, and even now, med schools will look at your bachelor's program being if it's non-traditional, if you have something that might be able to supplement your education in med school,
Yeah.
that would help a lot. I know I have students who are torn between whether or not they want to go into nursing or becoming, doctors, right? I don't know how much insight you have about that, but can you tell me what you know?
Yeah, sure. I can speak to the formal route of education as well as I can to being a physician. I will say the nursing route is different. Okay. And I'll tell you about the differences as I know them. So I can speak to it somewhat personally. My mother is a nurse, and she's actually an ICU nurse. That's one of the highest levels of nursing, intensive care unit nurses. They often uh, do more and know more at the time than a physician, really, at the time of an emergency when a patient is critically ill in a hospital. So they are very, very vital people. But essentially, the nursing pathway is not as long. Okay. So you have heard this long, exhaustive, annoying story about how went from undergrad to regular undergraduate school to medical school to residency to fellowship. Okay, you don't have to do all of that with nursing. Okay, nursing school is required, preceptorships are required, clinical hours are required. But once you graduate, you're able to go directly into nursing, and the path is much shorter. Now, salary wise, depending on what you do, it can be very lucrative, right? So I spoke about ICU nursing. ICU nurses can garnish a very, very high wage, okay? Probably close, sometimes even better than some of the lower paid primary care specialties for physicians. And in fact, there's something that's come up as a field more recently that was not available to me when I was training, was something called CRNAs. So there are nurse anesthetists. So these are nurses who went to nursing school and then they went to nurse anesthetist school, usually after some years working in an ICU. So you do have to have some field experience before they accept you. But once you train to be a nurse anesthetist, you essentially and perform a lot of the portions of the procedure that an anesthesiologist would do. So you're like an anesthesiology provider. You're not a physician, but you're a CRNA. Okay. Some of those CRNAs are getting paid very well, probably as on par to about the median salary of a lot of physicians, even depending on the area that you live in the country. And a lot of states are actually moving towards having only CRNAs and maybe one anesthesiologist for every 10 CRNAs or some ratio. So I would not discourage it if you decide you are going in it and you have incredible loans to pay, or the finances are something that's important to you. The other thing is if you do nursing, if you're a floor nurse or an ER nurse or anything like that, you do make great money, but you're always under the supervision and authority of a physician. So you have to pick up the phone often and ask a doctor for orders or ask for permission to do something or to notify them something. And it's just a different place on the chain, in the ladder, right? If you're a nurse. And so if that's something that doesn't bother you, that's totally cool and that's great. I think I knew myself very early on, and I knew that I wanted to be like take responsibility. It's in a lot. It's a lot, and there are some days that it wears more heavily than others. But I always knew that I wanted to be the leader of the team, and I did not want to call somebody else to get permission to do something for my patient.
Wow, great. Thank you. I hope that kind of clarifies things for some of our students who are, I guess, preparing either for nursing or going the physician
Yeah,
route.
they're very
Hmm.
different paths. They're great paths,
Hmm.
but different.
Okay. And oh, I think there we go. So the next one is the future of medicine, and I think I've seen either an Instagram photo or some Facebook photo of you sitting in one of these machines looking into
Yeah.
this thing right here. Can you tell us a
So
little
yeah.
bit more about, yeah, a little bit more about it and what's going on?
So this is the Da Vinci robot made by Intuitive. I am not paid by them to say that, and you should know that one of the qualms I had with robotic surgery is that there's only one um, manufacturer, and I want there to be more manufacturers because I do believe competition usually allows prices to go down, more accessibility, and it allows excellence to breed. That being said, this robot is excellent. So usually I start out in the middle photo where you see that is supposed to be like a technician placing ports in a patient. So I will actually place ports as I would for regular laparoscopic surgery, those small incisions with those trocars, and then I would dock arms at a robot, and then I would transition to what you see on the left, which is a person sitting at a robot and operating. So yes, in addition, not only do I get to operate kind of like in my pajamas with the music that I want, I get to take my shoes off and I get to sit down and operate. And I think that's something that's Pretty cool about robotic surgery. In addition, because I'm at a teaching institution, I'm an academic surgeon, I have dual consoles. So I have a trainee surgery physician, a general surgery resident sitting at a separate console, and I am there and I can actually stop them and I can talk to them in the robot in a way that is a lot easier than if we were doing it at the table. At the table, I would have to literally physically reach over and grab your arm and stop you. I would have to point at the screen ergonomically. It's not as easy. And that is ironically how I trained. I trained laparoscopically. I did not train robotically until I started my big girl job. And then the pandemic came on and I started doing robotics. But essentially, the future of medicine is going to be often robotic. I also think artificial intelligence, AI, is going to play a larger role. I think AI is going to play a large role in radiology. And interventional radiology perhaps as well, and some other fields may be heavily assisted by AI technology. So that's something else you can think about as combined engineering medicine background is also really advantageous because, yeah, the future is wide and open.
Wow, great. So, I know you mentioned AI and in radiology. Correct me if I'm wrong. Is it that AI is helping to analyze radiology scans and then coming up with like a diagnosis or something? Yes.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay.
I can't speak to it in great detail as some of my other colleagues like that do, like for instance, breast surgical oncology. So those surgeons that take care of like breast cancer only patients. But now often a lot of their reads will be read as well by AI. So, of course, then starts this potential hysteria of like, oh my gosh, AI is going to take our jobs, la la la. I can tell you for surgery, um, no matter what anybody tells me that one day a robot or a machine is going to do my job, I can almost tell you that it will be a very long time before anything like that happens because the minutia and the thousands of points of information that I need to synthesize in order to make a decision is just not yet able to be done by a robot. I can almost say it will be one of the last fields to go to AI, if at all, because it just requires a human.
Okay. And outside the operating room and outside, I guess, clinic hours and whatnot, how much prep work goes into like leading up to like your time in the OR? Like, so let's say for a patient, do you have to spend hours upon hours in analyzing and then coming up with a diagnosis and all of that before you even enter the operating room?
Yeah, so it's never just like a happenstance that I'm like, oh, I'm in the operating room. Usually I've met that patient before in the clinic multiple times. I've met their family. I've talked to them about risks and benefits. I know their diagnosis. I know how bad their diagnosis is. I have all of the diagnostics, and then we usually have our residents. It depends, obviously, where you practice. If it's a private practice, it's all 100% you. I will have looked at all the CT scans, read all the notes, asked all the questions, sent all the labs, done all the tests so that I can confidently tell the patient, when they go to sleep, they close their eyes and get on that life support, that I have done everything I can possible to prepare for their surgery to make sure that they have the best outcome. Now, obviously, if you're a trauma surgeon, you don't get that time. They come in, shot, stabbed, you got to go. You have no idea if they smoked, what they ate for their last meal, you just go. And that is a different style of medicine, also awesome. I thought I was going to be a trauma surgeon for a very long time. A different way to practice. But in my field, yes, I do a ton of preparation. And then in addition, if I'm not as comfortable with the procedure, if I'm just learning it myself or trying to teach myself a new technique that's even more minimally invasive, I spend lots of my own personal time like watching, I call it watching porn jokingly to try to like make a joke with my residents so that they can get excited about watching videos. But I watch lots of YouTube and lots of portals that are like YouTube for surgeons, like private portals. I watch hundreds of hours of other surgeons sharing their operative videos so I can learn tips and tricks and technique. And when I was in training, they often videotaped all of our surgeries. So I have videotapes of some of my surgeries, and you can like see me operating. And just like athletes, who analyze their film and they come up with strategies, I also do the same for surgery.
Oh, amazing. And how much, well, I know that robotics and this type of surgery is, I guess, more and more common in a lot of the other fields. And you mentioned that AI would not be able to, I guess, take the place of your role in this in surgery. Um, do you feel that, I guess, AI will end up taking up some other, I guess, some of the other medical professionals within the hospital? Will they be able to replace their roles? Like, not a surgeon per se, but maybe any of the other more, I don't want to say minor, but less major roles in the hospital.
I'm gonna say I don't know. That's probably
Hmm.
my final answer, but I think it's more nuanced. I do
Hmm.
think that the human touch is always needed. I don't know about you, but when I walk into a hospital, I like to be greeted by a human being, right? But technically, getting your identification, maybe drawing your labs, getting you enrolled in the hospital system, maybe doesn't need a human. And maybe it needs a human to facilitate steps that are done by I do think that some of those things will be supplanted by technology. We're already working towards that. And then, like I said, I think radiology, having reads like double, triple checked by I think something like that will become more prominent. Um, and then in my field, I can tell you that often they're looking to see AI assist surgeons by like reading fields that you're seeing in your either in the robot or on the screen. But again, these are very, very early stages. I maybe I lack the ability to sort of predict and see where things will go, but I think it would be hard to replace those that are in like technically procedural fields because there's so many nuances to the human body that just can't be done taken over yet by technology. But maybe we'll get there one day.
Okay, great, thank you. So, I guess we are going to move into our Q&A, um, and we're kind of right on time. If anyone has any questions, feel free to type it in the chat. Um,
Yes, please.
and yes, and we can see if we can get to them. I see a hand raised. Um, uh, let's see. Go ahead and type in the chat if you can, and it will be sent to me. Okay.
Hello, can you hear me?
Oh, hey, Luke.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. So the question I'm asking about is like I'm just a little bit confused about the music in the operating in the OR
Mm.
parts. Like I'm
Uh-huh.
like what? Because like the music like sometimes gotta like make people w like unfocused. Like they could distract them. That's what I'm confused about.
Yeah, sure.
Um,
I think it's a good question. So, we've actually done studies where we will actually take students and trainees and give them a task, and it can depend on the type of music. So sometimes they think classical music is more calming. Upbeat music will help someone do a more like less technically complicated, more mindless part of the surgery, say closing the abdomen. I think at the appropriate volume and the appropriate kind depending on the comfort level of those around you, it is totally a-okay to have music in the operating room. Some surgeons prefer to have no music in the operating room. So all you hear is like a lot of beeps, right? Because you have machines going and a lot of mechanical sounds of like pumps, like the air pump used to. So I don't want to let you think that there's no noise in an operating room. There certainly is tons of noise in the operating room. Pagers going off, conversations being had, nurses talking on the phone, communicating with other parts of the hospital. So there is plenty of noise in an operating room, but it is absolutely acceptable to play music in the operating room during the case. So it's a choice that the surgeon makes and a choice I think a surgeon should make with the rest of the team. And yeah, I think it just depends on the type of surgery and the surgeon. But for instance, everyone knows my room is pretty fun and we like to bump music.
well, we have another question. Amy, they're asking, one student is asking, as for USC, what was something that the school really values in their students? I guess from your experience, both from, I guess, the classmates that you've met or on campus, and possibly in your application going into USC?
Yeah. So obviously it was a long time ago when I went, so I will first preface it with that disclaimer. However, I do think that USC does a couple of things well. One is that once you're there, they do attempt in a significant way to try to connect you with alumni and be to make you aware that there is a network there to help you. So there are a ton of alumni events, a ton of networking events that they provide for you. And it is totally encouraged, and the culture is encouraged to say, hey, you went to USC. Can I ask you a question about your career now at XYZ company? And so, that sort of culture of networking and alumni and that closeness is something that I was looking for, and they definitely had at USC. What was the second part of the question? I forgot.
Well, as what do they value in their students? What
Yeah, what did
qualities
they?
maybe?
Okay, yeah, good. So, I don't, again, speaking to like stories where like you maybe have helped somebody you don't even remember. Apparently, I helped a friend of mine at some point rewrite her essay and urge the school to give her a half scholarship to full scholarship, and she got it. And I don't even remember this happening, and she brought this up last year. I completely forgot we ever had this conversation, but I will tell you some of the things that USC definitely goes for. They go for somebody who cares about their community. Okay. So whether there is I'm just going to make something up, an underwater basket weaving community in Camarillo or something, and you are passionate about that and you show that you have taken steps to be integrated, to be a leader, to improve something part of that community. I think USC definitely likes students who have that kind of trait. Okay. So yes, you can be a perfect student. You go to school, you get good grades, you don't talk to anybody, you come home, it's great. Okay. But then you have somebody who also gets good grades. Maybe they're not as perfect, but they're really involved in I don't know, the chess community of Los Angeles. I'm making ridiculous examples just so you guys don't think that there's like something specific you have to do. Essentially, if there's something you're passionate about, a hobby, something you like, something that your family's into, and you show that you care about that and you have a platform to speak on, and that you wish that you can improve your community in that way, that is something USC definitely treasures. I think more often than not, their alumni tend to be people who give back to the community, and has to be in like a real way. I'm not going to talk to anybody. I'm going to get my grades. I'm going to get my degree. I'm going to go to my job. I'm going to make my money. I'm going to come home. That's not what they want. They want people who are really genuinely caring about the community, whether it's the underserved community around USC or Los Angeles. Those kind of things they really look for.
Wow, great answer. As maybe you can, how many during your time at USC, how many, I guess, Marshall business students did you meet?
Oh, a lot, ton.
A lot, right?
Yeah.
And what did I guess if you were to describe, you took a random sample of those business students and you were to describe the types of personalities you were seeing, what could you say to that?
So a lot of, I mean, that's just like, I'll answer that question in a couple ways. One, it's hard to answer because it's like asking anyone, like, describe the students at your high school. You're like, oh my God, there's like 300 different subtypes, right? I will tell you the Marshall student tended to be smart and driven, but also charismatic, cared about leadership, and usually had something that made them stand apart that was a driving force. So for some of them, it was entrepreneurship. For some of them, it was finance. For some of them, it was accounting. For some of them, it was community-based banking. I'm not a business student or ever was, so I can't speak to you with all the subtypes. But I will say one thing remarkable was is like when I would go to meetings or organizations or go to football games or rallies, you would notice that the Marshall students always had something that they were passionate about and that they really wanted to work on, and hopefully that they would see themselves integrating into their career in the future.
Okay. Yeah, I just because we have a student who is wanting to enter into USC, but I'm still deciding whether or not it's for Marshall or for Dornsife,
Uh,
Yeah, but while I'm waiting for a couple more questions to queue up, um, what about, I guess, being a Trojan did you enjoy the most?
Yeah, so I would say that, I often get a lot, I don't know why, I get a lot of flack from my colleagues. They're like, how can you not love your current employer? And I'm like, first of all, I'm employed by the County of Los Angeles. So I work for the people. I work for the city. Okay. Yes, I am academically affiliated, and in some ways, I am part of the UCLA community. But I have to tell you, my time at USC makes me like a ride or die Trojan. I was there for some really great football years. We were there. I was there for all the Heisman Trophy years and the pre-Heisman Trophy years and the great heyday of USC football. So certainly that was a great time to be a Trojan. But as I keep on going back to, there's this common theme of sort of community and camaraderie and networking and fellowship that's there. And so that is something that cannot and will not be replaced. I have, like I said, some great friends from the very first day of college, and we all, catch up with each other and keep up with each other's lives. And the common thing is like our USC days were awesome. They were great. And we all sort of remember those fondly because there was that love and that support there in the community. And I think that that's what makes me definitely a Trojan. And I will bleed cardinal gold way before I wear, for instance, I won't wear a UCLA cap in the operating room. Everyone's like, you're crazy. I'm like, no, USC.
Oh, good. Good to know. So at this point, I'm not seeing any more questions per se coming in applying to this. So I am going to, oh, wait. I think somebody got disconnected. So Andrea, I hope you got the whole response in there because that was your question. Um, but at this point, I will move on. If anyone has any questions, feel free to email Jason at theprovidenceway.com, and I will try my best to get them organized and over to Dr. Amy. And when she's not doing cases and clinic hours and teaching, hopefully she'll have a little bit of time to help
Oh,
answer
yeah,
some.
sure.
Uh-huh. And I wanted to especially say thank you to Dr. Amy for your time. I know it's busy, and we've been trying to plan this for some time now.
For years.
Yeah, yeah, yes. But I hope hopefully we get to see more of each other towards the future. And if any of our high school students going into medicine, I guess, want more information and everything, please reach out to me and maybe we can hook something up. Yes.
Okay. Sounds great.
Okay.
I didn't get to see many of your faces,
Yes.
but it was really nice meeting you all. I
Mhm.
feel like I was sitting more in your seat, closer
Mhm.
than to me being like a boss surgeon. So I really empathize with where you're at in life, and I wish you all the best of luck.
All right, thank you. All right, end the meeting. And there we go.